Welcome to the Modise Network. In a week of distressing economic news, a bit of positive news is that the South Gauteng High Court confirmed a settlement order of 5 billion rand in the Silicosis case. This follows 4 years of intense negotiations between mining companies and representatives of hundreds of thousands of mine workers who either died or contracted silicosis. According to the settlement, the fund that will be established will make out payments of between 70,000 rands to 500,000 rands to 10 classes of claimants. I will be talking to the representatives of the two groups shortly. Now, it is common knowledge that the South African economy is in trouble, with the latest Stats SA report saying 29% of South Africans are unemployed. This happens on the back of the earlier report that the economy had contracted in the first quarter, and the latest reports that the Eskom financial results show that the utility had suffered losses of over 20 billion rands this financial year, the worst in the history of the company. There is anxiety and despair in the nation as businesses close down and retrenchments continue. The politicians are at each other's throats, and foreign investors are reportedly taking their money out of the country. There is now talk of a possible bailout by the International Monetary Fund. Can the situation be turned around? We'll be finding out when I talk to Neil Coleman of the Institute of Economic Justice, as well as economist Isaah Mhlanga of Alexander Forbes. And I'm joined in the studio by Chief Economist of Alexander Forbes, Isaah Mhlanga, and via Skype we have Neil Coleman, who's co-director at the Institute for Economic Justice. And we invite you to be part of our conversation by sharing your thoughts with us on social media using the hashtag the Modise Network. Well, South Africa is in a situation and a half. It sounds like a torrent of negative news that's just been coming through. And the game that we play in South Africa, that of shooting ourselves in the foot, continues. Let me hear from you, Isaah. What concerns you the most about the latest numbers, especially of the high or the increasing unemployment rate? But, you know, there's more detail to that. Tell me.
Absolutely. If you look at 29%, it means 3 out of 10 people almost are unemployed. They can't find jobs. But that is the broader, as a country as a whole. But if you take the expanded definition, which is the broader concept, almost 4 out of 10 individuals who are looking for work actively are not finding jobs. But if you look much more closer at the youth, from the ages of about 15 to 24, that number increases significantly to 56%, which means over half of those between 15 and 24 years of age cannot find jobs. And this is a manifestation of how the economy has been managed over the past couple of years. But also there are global factors that influence there, but by and large it's domestic factors. If you look historically, every time we've had the economy improve, it has improved on the basis of better economic growth globally, which is still there now, which says to me that the issues that we have currently are domestic issues because we still have growth outside of South Africa, which should have helped, but we didn't do the right things for us to benefit from that global environment. If you look at fiscal policy, which was used to kickstart the economy after the financial crisis, we don't have the space. We borrowed over 1 trillion rand more compared to what we had just before the financial crisis, such that our debt increased to about 2.4 trillion rands. But we did not build infrastructure, which will facilitate the creation of new businesses that employ people.
We borrowed 1 trillion more than what was the case before the financial meltdown of 2008. Now South Africa owing 2.4 trillion. As you say, what was the money borrowed for? What was it used for?
Largely, it went into increasing public sector wages, which by themselves do not make the economy to grow in future. It goes directly into consumption. So by itself does not encourage the formation of new businesses. And this talk that we're having, we do not have necessarily a jobs problem. We have a skills problem. You know, I say that because if we had businesses that are formed, they would require skilled labor as part of the inputs into the production process. Remember, businesses do not start to create jobs. They start to make profit, and jobs are an outcome of the production process. So if we concentrate on creating a conducive environment to start new businesses and to make those existing businesses thrive, it means jobs are going to be created. But again, we have to be outward looking in the sense that we have to encourage local companies to be competitive in the global markets so that they can export what they produce externally.
Well, Neil, let me bring you in on the conversation. I mean, when earlier this year, the report came out that said the economy had contracted, and now the very latest one that is indicating the increase in the unemployment rate in South Africa, the government gets blamed for that, right? Now, if government gets blamed for that, it makes one wonder, how could government be responsible or liable for part of the economic problems or challenge that we find ourselves in if the same government over the past few years has been talking about national development plan and the ambitions of the economy growing at 5% and reducing the unemployment rate by half by 2025, 2030, and so it goes. So in other words, government developed the national development plan or policy on one hand, but how did government come short in implementing the very plan that itself developed?
Look, Tim, I don't want to rain on the parade of everybody, but the NDP is really a non-starter. I think we mustn't fool ourselves. I think the economic chapter of the NDP puts forward a range of proposals which are problematic. They're in the old mold. It was essentially written by Treasury. It follows the very old, orthodox, narrow economic prescriptions, which has got us into the problem in the first place. We sit with the situation that we're in as a result of a toxic combination of failed economic policies, old orthodoxies which have been discredited around the world, by the way, including amongst the IMF, who now is accepting that many of the orthodoxies that they had proposed be adopted don't work, such as inflation targeting, such as capital account liberalization. They've more recently put out a research paper on industrial policy, acknowledging that industrial policy was very, very important in the successes of the Asian tiger. So on the one hand, we have this failed economic policy. On the other hand, we have the looting, the rampant looting that took place over the last 5 or more years, which have drained the state-owned enterprises and the state of essential resources. And the mess that we see at Eskom now is a product of that, and the mess in other state-owned enterprises. So we need to address both issues. We need to address the need for a different type of economic policy framework, and we need to address how we repurpose our state institutions for development, not for looting. So it's a complex situation that we're sitting with, Tim, and I think it requires a range of carefully thought through responses.
What is how do you respond to what Neil is saying here? I'll tell you, I'm thinking about the state-owned enterprises that the government or the tripartite alliance has been insisting that they should be at the center of a developmental state. But we know how our state developed as a result of the same SOEs. Now, it's just increased the debt burden that you referred to. But there are other elements in what Neil said that you probably do not agree with.
Look, on the case of state-owned enterprises, they do play a role. If you look in other countries such as Singapore, you look at countries such as China, a lot of the infrastructure development was led by state-owned companies. But with that said, the management of those state-owned companies was beyond reproach. And if they are found to be corrupt, they are thrown into jail right away. But what we see, hearing from the State Capture Inquiry, the Zondo Commission, a lot of corruption took place, and we are yet to see a single person being held accountable, which means they almost play a role of a way to loot resources out of state coffers. So they are not playing the role which they are designed to play. If you look even in the history of South Africa, the roads, rails, and many of the infrastructure which we have today was developed by and large state-owned companies. But over time, they need to evolve with the changing economic structure of the economy. Eskom, as it stands today, is no longer fit for purpose, given that we are moving towards a low-carbon environment if you look at other countries, but we continue to invest heavily in coal-fired power plants, even though it's proven to be quite costly to build the power stations. But that aside, the issue of inflation targeting, which Neil raises, I think it's one of the macroeconomic policies that works in many other countries. I wouldn't think monetary policy itself is a constraint on growth. We were growing at close to 5%, yes, on the back of commodity prices when interest rates were too high, so inflation targeting is not the problem at all. It is in the productive sector of the economy where we have problems. We are not producing the stuff or the things, goods and services which are required by the rest of the world.
But is it the problem of the private sector not investing accordingly in the productive side of the economy, or is it a matter of policy failure? Well, you make brief comments, and then I'd like to. Well,
that's a major issue.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a major issue, and you know, if Isaah talks about the question of interest rates and the cost of credit on the one hand, and productive investment on the other, there's a very close connection between those two things. Because if you don't make available affordable credit for investment, the investment doesn't take place in the productive sector. We have a financialized economy in which speculation is rampant. And that's why, you know, the IMF Research Department, Joseph Stiglitz, and other famous economists internationally have warned of the danger of both financialization as well as inflation targeting, which makes productive investment too expensive. So there is a connection between these things. And the policy framework which government embarks on, no one is saying that they must dictate to the Reserve Bank, for example, what the exact level of the interest rates must be. But there needs to be a clear mandate and policy framework which says that we have nearly 40% unemployment in this country. We have the highest level of inequality in the world. We have over 60% of our people living in poverty. Therefore, instruments such as monetary policy need to be used to advance development, employment, and job creation, like they do with the US Fed. You just have to turn on CNN or any other international news station, and they're constantly talking about how a cut in interest rates will be used to stimulate those economies. And after the global financial crisis, many states and many economies have used the instrument of interest rates to achieve that. But it can't be interest rates alone. It has to be a combination of monetary policy, fiscal policy through the use of the budget, investment, etc. And that's why we're calling for a comprehensive package which aims to stimulate the economy. Because, Tim, our economy is in ICU. It's in a downward spiral. And when everybody has stopped investing, consuming, and there's an expectation that there's going to be no economic activity, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's why you need a bold stimulus to get the wheels of the economy turning.
Absolutely. And let's pick up that conversation, right, and elements of it in a moment when we continue after the break. And from you, the viewer, would like to hear your comments on social media. The hashtag is the Modise Network. Don't go away.